So if there's any question regarding this presentation, please at the end you can ask all the questions and we can discuss. This presentation is essentially to provide a general background. Okay. Okay. So what I'll do now is to give a very brief idea of the situation of the global aquaculture, the challenges to increase productivity globally, and I will talk about the ecosystem approach to aquaculture and about the code of conduct for responsible fisheries at the end. You probably are aware that, well, for some reason it doesn't show the full presentation, and I don't know why.
I don't know. Hold on. No, it's too large.
Probably a problem with this.
No, this is too small.
No, it's a problem with the screen definition.
For down, huh? Some of it not clear, huh?
Yeah, because it's got. Is there a way to fix it?
That, and here you have the relevance of the different regions. So of course, 66% of the global production is in Eastern Asia, 17% in Southeastern Asia, Southern Asia, South America, Northern Europe, and Northern Africa. Northern Africa contributes 1%, 750,000 tons. Most of this is coming from Egypt. So it's a quite relevant contribution.
As for aquaculture.
For aquaculture. This is just aquaculture, okay? The other important thing is to explain that the average annual growth rate is different between regions. So for example, in the decade 1970 to 1980, Latin America had a very large growth rate. The growth rate is decreasing, but the interesting thing is that Africa growth rate is increasing. So especially during the 2000 decade, the largest growth rate was in Africa. And again, it's essentially Egypt. Still, it's a very large growth rate. So FAO is very clear that the largest potential in terms of growth rate is in Africa and in Latin America. Asia is very large, but the potential to move, to increase, to use more areas is small, is limited. So we have here, especially the marine environment, and in Latin America, a lot of fresh water as well.
Excuse me, can I ask now or later?
You can ask now questions, no problem.
According to the average annual percentage growth rate, is this according to the temperature, the experience in agriculture?
No, the growth rate represents the net growth rate. So without explanation, what we understand the reason is in Asia, because in Asia aquaculture is an older practice, so the technology grew up there and all the countries are practicing aquaculture. But now in Africa and in Latin America, for example, it's essentially because it's a new sector. So the growth rate is very quick.
So the growth rate, referring to
the production.
To the production?
The production. Only the production here. We are not explaining exactly why. It's just aquaculture, production, growth rate.
To speak about the percentage of development, not an amount of...
No, it's the growth rate. So let's say one year you have 200, next year you have 300, then you have 50% growth rate. So it's only the rate. Okay?
In other words, it means that these countries or this region is understands the importance of aquaculture.
Exactly. I mean, it's a potential of growing. No? So this is a relevant thing. Of course, aquaculture is produced in many different ways: cage culture, shrimp farming, mussel farming, so there are different inputs, and this also makes a big difference from the economic and the environmental perspective. This is the less expensive from the economic and environmental perspective, because we don't need to add additional food. No? So in his case and this case, we need to add food, and that's usually one of the most important costs. Just to give you an example, in China, the important thing is that they don't have space to grow more or water to use, so they are intensifying in the same space, producing more, making more efficient the production. So you can see that, for example, the pond culture in tons per hectare is increasing very strongly. So they are doing better production, producing more per hectare. Same thing in all the other systems, but especially pond culture. Paddy fish, rice fish farming is also increasing almost exponentially. So it's the same area becoming more productive, more efficient. So this is also a key for the potential growth of aquaculture when you have limited land or limited water resources. Okay? Perhaps one of the most interesting cases today that we use it a lot is the production of catfish in Vietnam. Vietnam is producing today a very large amount. Actually, they are exporting more than $1,000 million in aquaculture production in catfish farming.
Pangasius.
Pangasius, yes, Pangasius. And the production per hectare is probably one of the largest in terms of food production worldwide. 200 tons per hectare per crop, and they can have 2 crops a year. So this is really efficient.
Vertical expand.
Yes, I was there about 3 weeks ago, and they can grow incredible large densities of Pangasius. It's a very resistant fish. It doesn't have all the needs that the salmon and other species, so you can have producing very high densities.
Very high density with extensive aquaculture or intensive?
It's almost intensive, because it's essentially, you see all these ponds have a very large density of fish, and they are feeding the fish. And so it's, in a way, you can see here the farm area, and the farm area is this, so you can see the farm area is increasing, but the production per area, the efficiency is also increasing. So they learn how to do it better, how to produce better feeds for the fish, and how to handle them better, better management practices. So in general, it's good management. The only thing that is still, they are lucky, is that these fish are very resistant to disease. But in the moment that there is a disease, they will have a problem. Because the fish are very crowded, very packed, so if a disease happens here, it could be a tragedy. So we are really trying to help them to have biosecurity measures, how to, protect the farming systems. This is an ideal situation, but the idea is that if you do it well, you can produce more and be more efficient. Even these are all small farmers. So very often one household have 1 pond. So in many cases, a large proportion are small farmers. So this is what we call the ecosystem approach to aquaculture. And when we talk about the ecosystem approach to aquaculture, we are talking about how can we put aquaculture integrated to the other uses of aquatic ecosystems. And this is very relevant for arid countries like Egypt, because you need to share the water resources with other users. And you need to let the other users, especially agriculture, understand that this is a very valuable production. So you need to take care of the water, and we need to do it together and in an integrated way. So we are really putting a lot of emphasis to this, because this is going to be needed more and more if we want the sector to grow. So we define the ecosystem approach to aquaculture as a strategy. This is a strategy for the integration of the activity within the wider ecosystem such that it promotes sustainable development, equity, and resilience of interlinked social and ecological systems. And I will explain that the ecosystem approach is guided by three main principles. These three principles are the same principles guiding the Code of Conduct for Responsible Fisheries. So, first of all, aquaculture must be developed in the context of the ecosystem functions and services. If we grow more than the ecosystem can hold, we will have a problem. So we have to be aware about the ecosystem functions and services. Aquaculture should improve human well-being and equity. We cannot have aquaculture just for few people. We have to make sure that we are favoring food security and we are providing equal opportunities. And aquaculture should be developed in the context of other sectors, policies, and goals. Aquaculture has to be understood by agriculture, by urban development, so we have to try to do it together. Some important differences between the normal way of doing things and the ecosystem approach. This is also true for fisheries. Okay? In the conventional approach, it's very much top-down, just regulations top-down. The ecosystem approach is participatory. We need to listen to the stakeholders. We need to listen to the farmers, to the users. They have to have their way to voice their interest. The conventional approach has one objective: production, production, production. The ecosystem approach has multiple objectives. It's not only production, it's also protection of the environment and the social and economic benefits for all. The top-down is sectoral. The ecosystem approach is considered the interaction with other sectors. This is very important. The conventional approach is focusing on the farm scale. In the ecosystem approach, we have to look at the nested scale. The different farms together, the cluster of farms, the way farms are organized, in the way we use the ecosystem and with other users. The top-down is predictive, the ecosystem approach is adaptive, and that's why the government role is very important. We have to keep moving and adapting according to the way the sector is growing. The conventional approach uses a lot of scientific knowledge. The ecosystem approach uses extended knowledge. We have to learn from the farmers. The farmers sometimes know a lot, but we have to know how to expand their knowledge. The top-down is prescriptive. The ecosystem approach should use incentives. We have to entice farmers to get to work with us together. The ecosystem approach is very focused on the corporate perspective, and the ecosystem approach is public and transparent. So it makes it better to be more sustainable. So, why do we use the ecosystem approach and the code of conduct to increase productivity? There are many policy options. For example, integrated management, what we call the watershed approach, cluster of farmers, strategic environmental assessment. We need to make sure that if agriculture is polluting the waters, we need to voice the needs for aquaculture, because if waters are polluted, aquaculture cannot grow. So we need to have a strategic environmental approach here. We need to also enhance agriculture, aquaculture integrated production. For example, rice fish farming, aquaculture water going into agriculture, not the other way around. Integrated multi-trophic aquaculture. And a key part are the organized farmers. Proper and fair aquaculture zoning, you are talking about that already, this is very important. Biosecurity framework are absolutely a must. Better management practices, cluster farmer certification, value chains with equity. So we have all these policies that are possible within the ecosystem approach. And finally, let me tell you that we just recently finalized a global aquaculture review is for 2010 because it takes a lot of time to put together good quality information. So for 2010, we have very good quality information for all the regions. So we have a regional review for Europe, Northern Europe, North America, South America, Saharan Africa, Asia, and we also have one for the Near East or Northern Africa. All the reviews are available in our web. They were not printed because the cost of printing, but you can download the reviews. The other good thing is that the review is both in English and in Arabic, so you can read it with no problem. With all the data, all the information is available there. And this figure is produced from a different review. We are finalizing a review for site selection and with carrying capacity for different regions. And Mr. Sadek from Egypt did this review. Sharif, yes. And so this graphic provides from his review. We are working on those, so they will be published very soon. And we can see here the nicely increase of aquaculture. So we can see the relevance of aquaculture sector in blue, and the way aquaculture is becoming very important in Egypt. So with that, this is just a very general introduction. So if you have any questions, we can answer those now. And if, you know, after the questions, we can move now to specifically to the code. Okay? So if there are any questions or clarifications or something that was not clear that we can ask Daniel to maybe translate.
I don't think it's a question more than it's a comment from my side. That as far as I understand, code of conduct, usually we use this phrase for fisheries. But I think in the couple of the last years, we try to use it in aquaculture also. I think in Egypt, we need to compare ourselves or the aquaculture in Egypt with other regions. It's very important for us. Because as far as I understand, of course, I'm talking about the information, the only one thing I understand. But as far as I understand that in Egypt, we try to improve our aquaculture. I think we have our specialist, Dr. Mohammed Al-Ghazar and Dr. Ahmed, our colleague in Gavard, and Dr. Saad. I think we have to spell it aloud. What our need, what we want to improve ourselves in aquaculture as private sector and as governmental. Of course, I'm talking about the other side, the other hand, not talking about Egypt and what we have in Egypt. So maybe we have some comments or...
Okay, if there are any comments, we have at any time, if you feel like you don't want to do it in English, you can do it in your language, and Daniel will help me to understand. So please feel free. Otherwise, we can move ahead, and I'm sure there will be more questions. So the presentation I will do now, you have the copies here. It's the same presentation. There are only a couple of slides additional here that you don't have there, but the core of this presentation, you have it on your notes. So there should be no problem. So I will move forward into explain why are we here today, what are we going to do. And so the main objective of this meeting is going to be to improve the reporting of the Code of Conduct for Responsible Fisheries and the specific parts of aquaculture. Well, as Piero explained this morning, aquaculture has been moving towards sustainability, and many actions have been carried out regarding the Article 9. So this is the Arabic copy of the code. I will pass it around so you can have a look. I think we have another copy in our documents. So this is the Code of Conduct. The code had several articles. When the code was developed, and was launched in 1995, aquaculture was not important. So the code was developed with a very strong emphasis on fisheries. So there's only one article, Article 9. If you look at your code, at this book, you will see that Article 9 is aquaculture development. So it's only one small part of the code. Okay? So the countries commit themselves with FAO to report every 2 years on the way we are advancing in complying with the code, in making fisheries and aquaculture more sustainable. But as I said, the code was developed when the aquaculture was not so important. The article on aquaculture is small, and the questionnaire that goes to countries every year goes to the fisheries department is more focused on fisheries. So we are trying to improve that situation. So what we are going to do today is to explain briefly what the code is, but I will focus on the purpose of the reporting on the compliance of the code. Why do we do that? Why do we need to do this? We are going to discuss briefly about how are the countries doing in complying and reporting the compliance to the code, and what is the meaning for us, for FAO, of this reporting. Then I will explain the process to improve the reporting, and then we will focus on the new questionnaire for aquaculture and on the objectives of this exercise. So you have that in Arabic, so every time I show the English one, you can also look the Arabic translation there. So, the FAO's mandate regarding the reporting. FAO is required to monitor the progress made in the implementation of the Code of Conduct for Responsible Fisheries, and the Article 4.2 of the Code assigns a major role to FAO in this regard. So, as you know, we have every 2 years the meeting of COFI, the Committee of Fisheries of FAO meets every 2 years. And one of the standing elements of the agenda is the reporting of the countries on the compliance of the code. This is a general report. Considering all the pressure over fishery resources and the blames on the bad fisheries management, the compliance with the code is very important globally. So FAO essentially has to fulfill this role that is being requested as the United Nations system that will monitor the application and implementation of the code and its effects on fisheries. And the Secretariat will report accordingly to the Committee of Fisheries. All states, whether members or non-members of the FAO, as well as relevant international organizations, whether governmental or non-governmental, should actively cooperate with FAO in this reporting. Okay? But this is the important part. Why it is important to comply with the code and also to comply with the reporting, and why it's important to do it as accurately as possible. There are several reasons. The first one is because for FAO it's very important to produce regional and global assessments of aquaculture. When we do that and we do it well, we are helping the countries to show the face of fisheries and aquaculture. It's also important because we want to improve the performance of the sector and ensure sustainability and food safety. And the third point is very important because we want to improve the image of the aquaculture sector and the confidence of the consumer in competitive times. Because more and more, as we say earlier, we have to compete for the use of resources. For example, for water, we have to show that the sector is making a very good use of some of these resources. And finally, we want more attention to the fisheries and aquaculture sector to assist the fulfillment of its potential for food supply and poverty alleviation. We really need to help countries to use aquaculture as a motor, as an engine of development and food security. But if we want to do that, we need to understand how is the sector doing in every country. We need to know how to help countries, and we need to assess our performance in doing that. So this is not in your slides, and this is very important. We can help the countries when the countries are reporting to us and we can understand what are the needs. And because the resources for FAO and United Nations are limited, it's better if we understand different countries' needs, so we can also do some regional approaches to our assistance to the countries, with DCP projects, with technical assistance. And we also need to know if we are doing well. We also need to know if the assistance we provide to you is the good one, is the appropriate one. So in this sense, that again, the questionnaire and the code should be very relevant. The other very important element of the questionnaire and the compliance in the code is that the information is absolutely confidential. We only use the information in our contacts in providing feedback and assistance directly to the country. We show the information only as a benchmarking approach during the subcommittee or during coffee and in regional basis. So we don't show your own responses, we don't show to anyone except in our discussions with you, with the country. Let me stop here very briefly to show, for aquaculture, for example, the responses to the general questionnaire. In 2002, when the subcommittee of aquaculture was created, the COFI-SCA, the responses were good. About 80% of the countries in Africa respond to the aquaculture questionnaire within the general questionnaire. In Asia, about 70%, Europe about 60%, Latin America, well, North America is only 2 countries. But then you can see that the rates start going down. So for example, for Africa, in 2008, only 30% of the countries were replying to us their response to the questionnaire. So this is no good. No good for us and no good for the countries. In other areas, for example, in the Pacific Islands, Southwest Pacific, their reply is high because they are really interested in getting assistance. But this is not good for us because in a way it shows lack of interest or maybe lack of understanding. So this is the trend we want to change. Okay? This is the same figure in Arabic, but you can see it there as well. So what are the main issues? The main problem on this lack of response from countries is that every 2 years the countries receive a general CCRF questionnaire. And within this general questionnaire, aquaculture comes only in one part, small part. Very often the questionnaire goes to the Fisheries Authority. And very often the Fisheries Authority does not pass the questionnaire to the aquaculture people. And so we don't get the right responses for aquaculture. So in many countries this is a problem. So the questionnaire needs for modifications to make it more easy to respond